Kia ora.
Kia ora. Morning, James. People still coming in. This is lovely. All right. Well, welcome to our August Climate Forum hui. Morning, Jenny. Morning, Jane. Nice to see everyone coming in. We've got lots to think about this morning. In particular, we've got two chapters drafted for our strategic action plan for the region. We're going to be looking at the resilient communities and the society and culture chapters a bit later on. You'll have a chance to feed into those, or if strategy isn't so much your thing, then to think about the vision and the values for the forum and the region. But before any of that, we've got a presentation from our science research and technology team on regional greenhouse gas emissions, which I'm really excited to learn more about. And finally, at very long last, we'll be looking at our new online platform, which is looking fantastic. A lot of work has gone into it to make it something that is really useful for everybody. And that's a lot to fit into 2 hours. So we're going to crack on. But before we do, I'd like to invite you to think about which of the breakout rooms you would like to be part of. I'm just going to put them all in the chat. So if you haven't got access to the agenda, you can see them here in the chat now. So the first one is the Resilient Communities Strategic Action Plan. The second is the Society and Culture Strategic Action Plan. The third is Values and Vision for our forum. And the fourth is Values and Vision for our region. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to go into the chat and type in which one you want. So you don't need to put your name or anything like that, but if you can type which discussion you would like to be a part of in the chat, either resilient communities, society and culture, values for the forum, values for the region, and just put that in the chat, and then our wonderful Greg is going to pre-assign us to the breakout rooms we want to be part of in time for that. So thank you, Greg, for doing that. I know it's not something you've done before, and I'm sure you'll rise to the occasion. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. I see people doing that now. If anybody gets stuck doing that, then feel free to shout out. And I'm going to ask you to put something else in the chat a bit later on. But for now, that seems to be working really well. Awesome. Okay, so I'm just going to assign the host to Greg. I can. Hold on. There we go. Okay. Greg, you are now the host, and you should be able to do that all right.
In terms of minutes, Julie, is there a particular one you want me to jump into to record what's discussed?
No. What we'll be asking people to do is to document their discussion within the discussion documents that each room will have. So you don't need to worry about minuting those. Thank you. But if you could minute the feedback afterwards, that would be brilliant.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Can
Okay. Sorry?
Is Jessie doing the minutes?
Yes, she is, Jo. Yes, she is. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Sure. Thanks.
Sorry, I meant to tell you.
Julie, just a moment. Not being familiar with this platform, what's the next step after writing in the selection?
There's no next step for you. Greg is going to put you into the right group, ready to go, and then when it's time, we will open those rooms, and you'll have an invitation to join the room, and you just click join, and it will take you through, hopefully, into the right place, the one that you've chosen.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, so over to the STAR group to tell us about our regional greenhouse gas emissions.
Kia ora koutou. It's let me just share my screen. That all everyone see that?
Beautiful.
Oh, okay, here goes. Well, first I'd like to acknowledge the help of the team in doing this, and particularly Lord Chelstrom and David Briggs, who did some fantastic calculations, and all the other people who have added to it. The second thing is it's a very tight schedule with all the slides that people wanted in. It's going to take the full 20 minutes. So there probably won't be time for questions, but please put your questions into the chat and I will answer them the best I can when it finishes. Okay. Okay, so that's the aim of the presentation. It's not about giving you solutions, but where you might find some answers. So it's very difficult to get the community council and politicians to focus on mitigation. And by mitigation, we mean just very simply reducing our emissions. Mitigation means that this will have an effect in the future if we reduce our emissions. And one of the ideas is the boiling frog idea. When do you jump out of the hot water as it starts to boil? I mean, do you do it now? Do you do it in 3 months' time? Do you do it in 6 years' time? And then, of course, it's too late. The second thing is that we're talking here about geological time, not human time. And geological time is a long way away. So Todd has made up this little chart here, which shows how the geological time links into human time. So this climate change is probably not going to affect most of us, because even with the BAU, business as usual model, then by 2040 and 50, it's still only a 2 degrees Celsius increase. But it's going to affect our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. And, you know, the thing is, when the future generations look back at us and they say, well, look at the bloody mess they made, and now we've got to clean it up. I mean, that won't be on our conscience, but it should be on our conscience, that we don't actually make such a big mess that other generations have to fix it up. I can give you a good example why politicians don't look at the future. Todd and I and a couple of other people are working on the Lancet Countdown, and every year we put in our little submission. And we've been trying to get the future stuff in there for 2 or 3 years. And every time we try to put it in, the Lancet will come back and say, no, we only want what's happening currently. The politicians are not interested in what's happening in the future. This is the UK politicians. So the trouble with that is that if you're looking at what's happening currently or in the immediate sort of human horizon, then adaptation becomes the main important vision. Whereas in fact, what we should be trying to do is prevent this stuff in the first place, which, as you can see from that chart, is a long time out. The Paris INDCs are what people have agreed to at the Paris 2015 Forum. The Paris 2C is what the IPCC recommends as being the absolute maximum to stop major issues, and the IPC 1.5 is the ideal, which we won't achieve. So it's the time that actually becomes quite an issue. Okay, so people often say, well, what can we do in New Zealand? Well, first of all, we are all linked together by our atmosphere. What we do here affects the people in Bangladesh. What the people do in America affects us here. So we can't do it like COVID. We can't put a little barrier around us and say, oh yes, we're going to protect ourselves. It doesn't work that way with the atmosphere. And the other thing is that if you take the US, for example, if you break down the US into individual states, their population is some a bit smaller, some are quite a bit bigger. But if all the small states said, "Oh, we're not going to do anything. It's such a small population here." Now that's like people in New Zealand saying, "Oh, we're so small, we're insignificant." And of course, that attitude means that nothing will happen. Okay, so just before I start the main emissions presentation, I just want to show where we are on the spectrum of emissions. So this is the tons of CO2 equivalent that is produced. Now, tons of CO2 equivalent is not just simply the fact that methane has a higher emission effect. People often say to me, well, you know, methane is worse, but it only doesn't last as long. The CO2 equivalent actually takes that into account. So it's the CO2 equivalent over a century. So it takes into account that the methane emissions actually drop. And so it is the best measure we have over the course of the century of the greenhouse gases that we produce. You can see us there at number 6, number 5. And now there are a few other countries between Kuwait and us. Most of them are small oil-producing countries or even larger oil-producing countries. And so I haven't included those because the chart would have been too big. But I've included all the big countries in there, and we are certainly way up there. And the Nelson Tasman region, as you can see, also is. Now, it might look interesting there that the dates there are for 2000, 2013, and where I could get the data for 2016. And you see for the Nelson Tasman region, look, we're making great progress, but actually there's problem with these things. There's fish hooks in this, and our emissions actually haven't decreased. What's happened in the Nelson Tasman region is our population's increased. So if you count this as emissions per capita per number of people, we look like we're getting better, but in fact, we're not. So here's another way of looking at it. This is the footprint approach. Now, what this approach does, it considers the imported carbon emissions, goods and services produced in one country but consumed in another. It's looking at the consumer side. But it also has fish hooks because, for example, cars made in China go on our footprint, but milk powder made by our cows goes on theirs. Now, that would be great if milk powder that we make and add to our emissions goes on theirs. We would be looking pretty. But you have to ask yourself, what is better? Is it better to try to control the emissions where things are manufactured or where they're consumed? Now, I don't know the answer. It's something that one needs to consider. The other thing that's important to consider is if you're looking up internet stuff on emissions, you'll see CO2 emissions, like in this particular one here, that doesn't include all the other emissions, like the major one from cows in our region, the methane. It only focuses on the CO2 emissions. And again, we're looking pretty good in that respect. So this is where I really want to start, sort of covering the background details. This is where we left off in the national emissions presentations that Joanna did a few weeks at the last HUI. And while that particular chart might hide some of the finer structures, some of the finer details, it's what we're committed to. And the IPC, I presume, have agreed that this is the best way of actually measuring the total greenhouse emissions. Remember, it's not just emissions per capita that's important, but emissions in total, which includes the population and the emissions per person. So, for example, there might be a lot of rich people in New Zealand with high emissions, but they may not be in high numbers. So we've got to take that sort of balance into the picture. This, I believe, is pretty robust data because it links together the greenhouse gases with the industries that produce them. And I think a lot of thought's been put into this. A point to note on this one, and this is where I come to the numbers thing, is people often talk about airline emissions. Well, over here, can you see my pointer? Over here, this little blue line on the left, under other, 1.1% under transport, that's the proportion, that small little sliver there is a proportion of airline emissions, and that includes the contrails. So you have to ask yourself, is this an important thing that we need to worry about? And again, it's not just how many emissions are produced, but how many people are using that form. And in a way, airlines is like public transport. You know, they can crowd 500 people into a plane, and then it starts to become really efficient. So what I've done here, I've superimposed the very recent regional statistics that we've just got onto the national ones. And unfortunately, things are never straightforward. Unfortunately, they've diced the cake up differently. So you see here on the right-hand side for regional emissions, do you see services? Well, I mean, where do services go here? Well, some will be in transport and some will be in, well, other and whatever. So it becomes quite awkward. And the other thing is that as far as we can gather, the statistics department has really developed this regional emissions very simply from a population proportion. What's the proportion of population in this region? This is the chart on the left is their main key point, and so they get that. The line here under households on the right-hand side that I'm pointing to is, look, you see there's no vehicles in here, which is a pretty unusual thing. But some of the vehicles obviously come under services and under households. And Todd has talked to the Stats New Zealand person, and they said most of the household emissions, most of the light brown there is actually from cars. And the rest of it, this little bit, is from other things like heating, for example. So I've tried to do that on the left-hand side, the cars down here, because not all transport is cars, and then the heating goes up here. But what you can see is the numbers between the two are pretty good. So you've got some things that we don't have, like electricity generation in large numbers, and probably there's some other ones in here that we don't have in such large numbers. But if you see here, the agriculture, which includes fishing and forestry, is about 50%, the bulk. The households, the cars in the household, is a bit more than a national because some of the other ones are a little bit less. And so the balance is pretty good. So what I'm recommending here is, because the regional data is quite blunt, that we don't actually use the regional data, we use the national data. And when it comes to global data, it's even worse. I mean, all this, everyone looks at things differently. So I've only actually managed to find 3 common sectors, and you can see them there: agriculture, waste, manufacturing, construction, road transportation, heating and cooling. Now have a look at that and see what you notice. I haven't used a pie chart because it was too cluttered, but just have a look at the bar chart, and some things should be really obvious. For example, in our region, which actually is the same, pretty much the same as New Zealand as a whole, we're way ahead in the agriculture and forestry emissions. Other regions are ahead in manufacturing and heating and cooling. And that, of course, makes sense. Our climate here is a lot milder than other places. We're not as hot as other places or as cold. So the heating and cooling one will be bigger in other places than here. So I just want people to be aware that if they use methodologies that are based on global emissions, and I'm thinking maybe of the drawdown, the methods are great. The methods that they've produced is great, but the results they come up with don't necessarily apply to New Zealand. So you then have to look back at the actual chart. This one, this is the key, I think, that we should be working from. We look at this chart and we see, well, how do their methods apply to our emissions? But there's data missing from this. As I said, it's simply seen the regional, yeah, I already said that one. But the point is, if Stats New Zealand simply scale down the national data based on population, we have to ask ourselves, how sensitive is that to any changes in the emissions that we might promote? So when we try to measure how effective we are, it's quite difficult to know how sensitive this particular methodology is. We don't have emission stations. Well, we do, but they usually measure particulate emissions. They don't measure CO2 emissions. We have the odd one around New Zealand, but certainly nothing in this area. So that's one of the important bits that are missing. The second thing that's missing here is the sequestration of trees and wetlands and also croplands. And what is the effect of croplands compared with wetlands and trees? Okay, so that's our starting point. So let's have a look at the sequestration issue first. Now we've had a couple of, we're very fortunate to have some local professors in that region. And the first one is David Briggs. And by the way, all these references and all these articles that they've produced, I have copies of them. I just need to know where to deposit them. This one's been peer reviewed. And when you, presumably you're reading this through, when you read it through, it's absolutely phenomenal. I mean, he was blown away when he found out that the trees that have been cut down in the last 20 years is the same as the emissions from 100,000 cars in this region each year. And we don't even have 100,000 cars. So this is something we could actually fix fairly quickly. You know, something which says to the council, hey, stop cutting down trees. And a lot of these are actually not in forests. They're in farmlands, they're in road edges, and would you believe, just the previous newsline, we got $1 million from the Provisional Growth Fund to cut down trees along the roads. And so we're going ahead and doing it. This is in the Tasman area. Now, yes, trees might be dangerous on the roads, but the most danger on the road is people driving fast and not being able to avoid them when they go around corners. So there's like, it doesn't make sense to me, and it's not sustainable cutting down trees. And in relationship to this, Todd has done a calculation on the conversion of agriculture, the different agricultural techniques. Like what happens if we, for example, take a quarter of the livestock farmland, and I've just taken that quarter, it's, you know, it could be any number. How does that reduce our emissions? And it turns out that it reduces the global emissions by about 30%. A massive amount, not just the farm emissions, but the global, the regional emissions by 30%. So let me just turn the page over. Now, this is just an example. Of course, there are other examples of sequestration, like the wetlands, even more effective than agriculture. But the other thing is, we can do these calculations. We can work out, we know what the regional hectares of livestock is, that's supplied. We know what the carbon sequestration is. And so we can make these calculations if any of the people in the group want. And it doesn't have to be in that sort of detail. Now, here's a great resource that I found while I was looking at how can we overcome this. I suggest you have a look at it. It's if you go and search for the Billion Trees program, it's a great website, and look for direct grants for tree planting. I'll put the actual link on it on the PowerPoint when you get it. It's a great resource which shows that farmers and trees can actually coexist. And it turns out that for every cow, about 10 trees will mop up the emissions from the cows. Now, that doesn't look too bad. That certainly seems to me like it's something that farmers could do. But of course, the farming group needs to take this and see whether they can take it further. I mean, this is just giving some examples of sequestration. Okay, now Jack, in one of our previous presentations to the Climate Forum, has talked about the energy descent or the energy cliff. How does this link in? Well, this is sort of where we are now. Maybe this looks slightly worse, but this is where we are. So, this is where this little diagram on the right shows where we are on the cliff. And so if we have the total energy, which is this amount available, some of it becomes what I call useful energy, which is this blue part here. And some of it is energy required to produce that useful energy. And what's happening is this energy required to produce the useful energy is getting higher and higher and higher. And the energy that we get from that is consequently becoming less. Now, if you think about it, if you include in the capital to get energy the decommissioning of dams, nuclear power plants, windmills, solar cells, if you include that cost in it, and also include the cost of the remediation from the increased emissions, then these numbers here become large, huge. And what happens? Well, you see that if we increase these two, capital to get energy, energy to get energy, which is what happens when you go down the descent, the useful energy decreases, and then we've got less for basic living and luxury living. And of course, it's sent up to the group that is looking at inequities, the climate justice group, to see, well, what can we do with that? I mean, will people hang on to their luxury living and the basic living energy will go down, or whatever? So, but that is up to another group to have a look at. Okay, so let's have a look at the importance of our actions. So first of all, by what we're doing, we're complying with the current government regulations. The problem is I've highlighted current there. I mean, who knows whether the next government is going to have the same regulations about zero carbon, whether they're going to modify it or they're going to put more restrictions on emissions from farming or less, who knows. But the most important thing, well, actually there's two important things. First of all, leaving the planet in good health for future generations. I think this is a key thing. We don't want to be looked back at being the generation that has messed up our globe. But we should also be prepared, even with the current emissions, if we cut them right down, the sea level rise is like a big train that is difficult to stop. And so there will be places in the world like the Pacific Islands, like the deltas, the breadbaskets of Vietnam, the Mekong Delta, and Bangladesh, the Ganges Delta. Where will those people go? And I think we have to be prepared to accept climate refugees much more readily than we are currently accepting. And of course, the big caveat there is that at the moment, the councils are still making a drive for growth. That's where they get their rates from, the increased rates, so our rates don't increase. And we have to be very careful that that drive for growth doesn't counteract all the good work we're doing in terms of reducing the emissions. And so how do we measure the effectiveness of our actions when we can't actually measure emissions? Well, we have to measure them indirectly. We have to measure the decrease in farming livestock, increase in tree cover, and so on. We have to try to develop biomarkers or ways of measuring emissions where they may not exist, but this is for other groups to work on. We have to look at the increased use of public transport, and then of course we need to balance that. Is public transport more effective than going to electric vehicles? So there's some ideas. As I said, we're not trying to give you the answers to what to do. We're just simply trying to give you some ideas of where to go. So this is my last slide. I'd like to make these resources, we've got stacks of resources on this available, maybe too many. But I'd also like to offer the members of the STAR group who've agreed to make ourselves available for the forum to estimate impacts and specific actions that we can take on the net emissions. So thank you for that. I will leave it there, and hopefully there'll be heaps of questions in the chat which I can answer.
Thank you so much, Bruno. What a wonderful presentation. There have certainly been a lot of questions popping into the chat, and we look forward to getting your input on those, whether by email or it's directly into the chat now. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand straight over to Michael of our Society and Culture group, who's going to be giving you an overview of that section of our regional strategic action plan. Over to you, Michael.
All right, kia ora e te whānau. So I've only got about 5 minutes to run through the talk, so I'll try and make this as quick as I can and leave a little bit of time for questions at the end. But just to start, ki ana whakatauki, he aroha whakatō, he aroha putamai. So if kindness is sown, in kindness you shall receive. And hopefully once I've gone through the strategy from the Society and Culture group, you'll see why I've chosen that whakatauki. So what I'll do is I'll just run through briefly about the scope of the Society and Culture group and why it's important to the forum's overall vision. I'll talk a bit about what our vision is for society and culture and what success looks like. And then I'll move on to the method for realizing that vision. And finally, I'll finish with just a quick rundown of some of the challenges and outstanding questions we've got off the back of that. So starting with the scope of society and culture. So as you might imagine, that is very broad. So you've got society on the one hand, all about the physical connections and networks between everyone in our community. And then you've got the culture on the other hand, which is more about the behaviors and norms and customs and ideas and how people interact within within that culture and giving some sort of predictability about how we're going to behave. So JP was just asking whether it would help if we put up the actual copy of the strategy for you to have a look at.
Or you can, I mean, if you want, you can, have you got the links to it? You can,
I haven't got it
it should be in
open.
the, I'll put the link in the chat if everybody hasn't got it.
Great. So people are welcome to have a look at it. It's a reasonably dense document, so it may be a little bit hard to follow along as I talk through, but definitely encourage you to have a read because there's some great collection of ideas and everything in there. So on the scope side of things, so yes, society and culture, really, really broad, you know, from big questions like why do we even live together as a group? Why do we even do this? To will my friends judge me if I get a takeaway coffee cup? So that's the challenge we had to start off with. So we really had to try and focus in a bit more and get into the areas that were sort of outside other subgroups that might not necessarily be covered by some of the more tangible things about land use and food and fiber systems and the like. And so with that focus in mind, so why is it important that the forum has society and culture as part of its strategy? Well, the reason is that climate change is a socio-cultural problem at its heart. It's really because we've set up these harmful structures and norms about how we behave in our society, and they're the cause of climate change. So we have to act on those and get some sort of modal shift going on and a cultural shift to happen. It's also important because we have some very positive parts of our culture. So we obviously have Te Ao Māori and this very unique Aotearoa New Zealand culture. There's some other great parts of our society too, so it's fostering and protecting those as we have the changes and challenges that come through from climate change. So that's sort of why we've really engaged with this topic, and we've had a small and very engaged group of about half a dozen of us and some really great conversations. And that's led to the creation of our vision, which the vision for success is really it actually follows on quite well from what Bruno was saying. It's really about being good ancestors. That's really the key part of it, is that we need to, our society and the Nelson Tasman region needs to accept the need to change, and that it needs to take a longer view, but it's going to do that with not despondency and isolation, but with optimism and hope. So that's a really key part of the vision, is that people can see where we're traveling, they can see that there's good changes that can be made, and they can start incorporating those into how they live their life and within their communities. So it's going to be inclusive, cooperative, caring, and we're going to protect our culture and nurture the good parts of it that we have. So that's the real crux of the vision. So moving on to how we would actually go about achieving that and realizing that vision. So a big part of the strategy document, there's a whole lot of ideas about different priorities and really tangible things that we can start getting into. So I'd encourage you to have a read of that. But to try and sort of boil down some of the essence of those, it's really about trying to create positive and constructive conversations between people. And the arts and cultural institutions are great places for those to happen, because they're the areas of creativity and fun, and they just invite you to use your imagination. So we can get these conversations running. People can encounter these new ideas, they can test them in a non-confronting way that they don't have to take ownership of, and then they can start to spread. And with those conversations going on, you can then amplify those even more by introducing some really positive stories, and that's again trying to build that hope and optimism. So picking out exemplars of people who are living these great examples of what this beautiful future can look like of caring and cooperation, amplifying those, sharing them around, and making them really visible and moving them towards these sorts of tipping points that we've seen in other areas, so that they become a social norm. They're not just an outliers of people doing things that are different. They are really things that people will embody into their own ways of doing things. So some of those sort of tipping points we've seen in the past about, you know, smoking and use of plastic bags and the like, it's not always easy to envision or pinpoint exactly when the change happened, but there was some sort of tipping point, and now our culture has embraced a different way of working. So that's kind of the overall method. It's a bit of a broad description of it, but that's really what we're looking to achieve, within the forum and also out in the community.
Thanks, Michael. Would it be okay to leave it there? And
Sure.
if anybody would like to ask any questions of Michael, of JP, and the others in that group, then visit them in the breakout room of Society and Culture, or put any questions in the chat now if you've chosen another group to work with, and they'll connect with you over those. Thank you. Okay, straight on to Anika now, who's going to be giving us an overview of our Resilient Communities Strategic Action Plan. And straight after that, we'll break out into our breakout rooms. If you haven't put any put the breakout room that you would like to be part of into the chat yet, then please do that now. Apparently the Resilient Communities group is pretty full, so if you still haven't made up your mind, then you might want to pick one of the others, the Society and Culture group that we've just heard from, the Values and Vision for our forum, or the Values and Vision for our region. Okay, over to you, Anika.
Hello everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Sorry. So I've just set up a little presentation. Thank you very much, Michael. Your presentation was amazing, and well done, Society and Culture team. So yeah, I'm just doing a presentation on behalf of the Society, the Resilient Communities part of the Climate Forum. And I'm just going to be going through this presentation and literally just reading out what's on the, what's written here on the, on the slides. So basically our vision, it's that community resilience means the ability of communities to adapt to short and long-term changes without losing their basic structure and function. Climate change will increasingly test the resilience of our communities through short shocks, for example, extreme weather events, and long-term changes to energy systems, for example. We need to be thinking and acting now in ways that take seriously into account the possibility that we will not be able to do the kinds of interventions in the future that we can do now. Community resilience is critical for the well-being of the people and during challenging times. So we've just got a diagram here and kind of shows this adaptive cycle rather than it being this kind of this growth that's just going up and up and up. It's more of a kind of recognizing when we need to conserve energy and go down and kind of release, and then again reorganize ourselves. So I don't know, some people might feel that we might be kind of here in the cycle. But yeah, so that's just there for your reference. So our vision would be, we envision a resilient Nelson Tasman region in which communities are connected, essentials are localized, and the economy is diverse. Our communities understand the risks of climate change and the need to be resilient to them. Our communities create and support alternative, redundant systems despite their inefficiency, because they recognize that redundancy, which allows flexibility, is an important part of resilience in these challenging times. Our region takes a long-term perspective on community development and climate change response. We recognize that each community's needs and responses are different, and that community-led resilience building is essential. We feel confident that our communities can adapt to constant change over long term together, because we are well connected with each other. We are networked into a strong resource to help in difficult help with difficulties. So some of the key principles is kotahatanga, unity, manakitanga, generosity, and kaitakitanga, stewardship. And some of the foundations of the community resilience for our region would be people, the power to envision the future of the community and build its resilience resides in the community members, systems thinking, so essentials for understanding the complex interrelated crisis now unfolding and what they mean for our similarly complex communities. Adaptability, a community that adapts to change is resilient, but because communities and the changes we face are dynamic, adaptation is an ongoing process. Transformability, some changes are so big that it's not possible for the community to simply adapt. Fundamental transformative changes may be necessary. Sustainability, community resilience is not sustainable if it serves only us and only now. It needs to work for our communities, future generations, and the ecosystems on which we all depend. And lastly, courage. As individuals and as a community, we need courage to confront challenging issues and take responsibility for our collective future. And yeah, that's everything. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anika and Michael, for giving us an overview of what's written in those strategy chapters and giving those groups an idea of what they're going to be looking at in their groups. So going into the breakout rooms in a moment, the Society and Culture group have the opportunity to comment and feed into the strategy that's been written, and also to answer a couple of questions that the group has not reached consensus or finished thinking about. So the first question for the Society and Culture discussion breakout room will be, when attempting to create social and cultural change, should we first focus on bottom-up individual and collective change before we work on top-down systemic and institutional change? So that's a kind of big picture question about how we should prioritise our action on creating social and cultural change. And the second question for that group to discuss is what local and central government policy changes might enable a cultural shift towards urgent action on climate change. So a really interesting question that some of our representatives from councils here today might have some thoughts about. How could they play an enabling role in a social and cultural shift? The Resilient Communities group, you have a question about prioritisation. With all the work streams that this group has prioritised, how should they decide where to start? What would have the most impact? What's the most important? So that group will have the opportunity to feed into what's been written through comments and suggestions in the online document, and have a think about how that group should prioritise its work. The values and vision folks, you've got a document to work through each. The links to all of these documents that I'm talking about is in the agenda, and I'm just going to put the link to the agenda into our chat for anyone who hasn't got it available. So you can go in there and you can find the link that you need for the group that you're going to be part of. I'd like to suggest that each group first decides on someone who might facilitate the conversation, someone who is willing to take notes within that document, and then has a quick check-in, a round of who are we, why are we here, and what were your thoughts on what you've heard this morning, before going on to discussing those questions. We're going to have through till 11:30. So that's a good 40 minutes of conversation, which feels like a lot right now, but won't be nearly enough, as these never are. and then I'll give you a call back at 11:30. And if somebody from each group is willing to feed back to the forum briefly, then that would be brilliant. So if you haven't put yourself down in the chats for a group that you've chosen, you'll be left in the main room, and we'll be able to put you into the right room straight away. So that's all good. Does anyone have any questions about the process before we press go on the breakout rooms?
Can I just ask something? Do you want us to put the minutes on that agenda, or yeah, that's how you want it, right? Okay.
Not in the main agenda, in the document that you click through to, there's somewhere for you to write. So down the bottom of the strategic documents, there's a breakout room discussion place. And in the values and vision documents, there's a table for you to write your ideas into. Thanks.
Okay,
Any other questions of process? Peter?
Julie, I've just logged into the values and visions for the region document, but it's asking me to request editing permission. You need to do that.
Thank you. I will go through and change that setting. If you, in a minute or so, if you refresh that page, you should be allowed in just fine. Thank you. I'll make sure all that access is fine. Any other questions of process? All right, so I'm going to ask Greg to press go on the breakout rooms now. I think you just click open breakout rooms. And so everybody should get an invitation to join if you click join, and then we'll see who's left at the end. Greg, that seems to have worked really well. Thank you so much for doing that. Okay.
I seem to have disappeared. Is it because I'm the host I disappeared? I couldn't assign myself to anything.
Oh, really? Okay, well, I will make sure that you can. So David, have you got an invitation to join?
No, although I put myself down for one of the groups.
Which group would you like to be part of?
I put myself down for values and vision for the region.
All right, Greg, can you organise these guys? Make sure they've got somewhere they want to go.
That's David for...
Yep. Values and vision of the region was what I put in the chat.
Okay.
Thanks.
Ah, because the chat rooms have opened.
You should still be able to do it.
If I press join, then I can join David Eyre to it, can I?
Yeah, it should be. It's quite good, isn't it?
I think he's just joined it, and I haven't.
Oh, okay, hold on. Okay, you're going to values for the region?
Me personally?
Yeah.
That was the plan.
Don't worry, Greg, I'm on it.
Okay, now I've got a breakout room. Okay, see you in a while.
Sean, where did you want to go?
Hi, Julie. Yeah, society and culture, thanks. And I just need to point out, I think my Wi-Fi connection keeps dropping out. So I've been just trying to log back in. Yeah.
Fair enough. And Greg, where did you want to go? Can't hear you. You're muted.
Values and vision for the forum.
All right, I'll set you through. Awesome. Okay. Values for the forum.
That hello, are you two in our group?
Yeah, somebody asked for help, so here I am.
Yeah, well, we were wondering, because there's only two of us here, maybe we should go into the other values group.
That's up to you, whatever you would prefer to do. There's Greg's been with you as well.
All right. Okay.
Whichever you like.
Well, let's start with we three, and then we could merge later, possibly. Is that
good?
Agreeable?
How much time do we have?
You've
20
got
minutes.
Until past.
Until past, okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
right.
Thank you, Julie.
Thanks.
To run you through the website. It's going to be a replacement for the existing website. That's the hope. So I'll share my screen now, Julie, and has that come up?
Yeah, beautiful.
Okay. All right. So, and I'll try and get rid of my own picture. Okay. So, well, all right. So this is it's a networking platform and a website and a blog and everything we kind of know so far about websites that are social websites and blogs, all sort of rolled into one. It's a wonderful kind of platform, and the hope is that it'll replace the existing website. Okay, so what you see there on the screen is the landing page that if you were a member of the public wanting to find out about the forum, this is where you'd, and you'd Googled Nelson Tasman Climate Forum or something like that, this is where you'd land. And it's, I'll just scroll down, you can see it's a news page. And the idea of this was to give the impression that it was a lively, full of activity and active website. So it landed on the news page. So yes, that's where you'd land. Then in the top bar, you can see news, events, resources, about, help, and gallery. And so by tabbing each one, by clicking on each tab, you'll come to, like that's the events tab. It's got a scroll down to upcoming events, even the local election debate. This is, there are public events and forum related events that can be added there. And once you're a member of this, which I'll talk about in a minute, you can add events in there. Then there is a resources tab. So these are different resources that have been posted up there already. That's, in a minute, I'll talk about what happens if you sign in as a member. And we'll come back to the resources in a minute. Then there's an About tab, which tells you actually a little bit more about the Nelson Tasman Climate Forum from its inception. Its mission is there to weave individuals, households, civil society organisations, businesses, councils and iwi together around urgent strategic action on climate change. So that sort of tells us the vision, and then you can have a link to this charter and the strategy. Then there's a help tab. And at the moment, the help tab leads you to a way to get to the site's kaitiaki or stewards, an email address so far. I mean, this whole thing's a work in progress, but there's an email address there that if you need help to sign in to as a member, you can contact either me, Anne, John Paul, or Liam. And in the gallery tab, it will be photos, I think. Yes, photos and perhaps videos. Okay, so that's if you're a curious member of the public wanting to know more about the forum. Now, what we're hoping is that you will all sign up. So if you see my cursor up there, the sign up tab up the top there will get you to the sign in page, the sign in dialog box, and I'll just go there and sign in myself. So I've already signed in. If you haven't done that, then you put in your email address and create a password. So I'll sign in. And we'll go back to news, which is the landing page. And now you see that the menu is somewhat longer here. In fact, now we can see the different groups in the forum. So this page is a pictorial representation of all the different groups, society and culture and strategic comms and so on, all the different groups there. And you can see that the photographs we've put on there, well, they have a kind of a logic to them. So the site Kaitiaki photograph, the strategic comms, the climate action plan, the admin and finance, they all have that three-pronged sculpture. And that's because they all belong to the same cluster. And the clusters are listed on the right-hand side down there. And the idea with that, and we haven't quite finished this, but that the photographs as icons are all the same. So the resources and waste, the food, forestry and fibre, the urban development all belong to the same cluster. And that on the right-hand, in the right-hand window, we'd have a thumbnail beside each cluster, which was the photograph, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? Anyway, so this is where you will be able to join your particular group of interest. So let's click on Society and Culture.
Peter, I'm just aware of the time.
Ah, yes, right.
We need to be closing up this meeting in less than 10 minutes. So I wonder if you wanted to quickly raise the privacy question.
Okay, yes, all right. All right, let's go to, I was trying to tab in on Society and Culture and it doesn't seem to be going there. There we are. Okay, so this is one that's already been added to, and you can see discussions on the right-hand side there. And what we're wondering about privacy is whether these discussions should be public or private. And there are ways to make them public or private. We could do it globally, or you can make, when you add to a discussion, you can make that discussion private using the settings. And so over here on the right, there's an options, there's a manage pages tab, there's a message settings tab. And I won't go into them in great detail, but there are two options for whether we achieve privacy. One of them is global and one of them is discussion by discussion, whether it's private or public. And now I'll show you the participants page as well.
Peter,
Yes.
might it be helpful to use that PowerPoint that has the
Right.
privacy question in it?
Yes, we'll go to the PowerPoint now.
Yeah.
Okay. Try and get it full screen. I don't think I can get it full screen. Never mind. We'll just go through the slideshow. Oh, here we are, slideshow. It seems to have...
We can still see the other screen. Perhaps if you stop sharing your screen and then share it again.
Oh, okay. Okay. There we are.
Can I just pause you actually at this point?
Yes.
And just ask everybody if you'd be happy to extend the meeting for say 15 minutes to talk about this privacy question. Does anybody feel strongly that they are not able to do that? Okay, I'm not seeing any concerns. We'll enable this discussion. Thank you.
Okay. So carry on, Julie?
Yes, please.
Okay. So privacy, these are the privacy arrangements we can opt for. Privacy on an insight is set on a page-by-page basis. So the privacy options can be highly customized. Any public pages can be accessed by search engines and may turn up in search engine results, but the search engine access to them can be disabled. And then messages sent between site participants can be set to private for the whole network. So there is a messaging facility in this website. You can send messages to each other, and when you do that, you can choose who they go to and whether they're private. So, and I haven't shown you the profile, but this is the profile, your own personal profile page. And you can make your own profile page private or available to participants, and you can also make it available just to people in the network that you choose as friends. So there's 3 privacy options within your own profile. Yes, and then this is the one I showed you before, that these discussions can be public or private. I don't think we need to show you that. We can disable search engine access globally through the site. Okay, so now we really do need some feedback about this. About the website and whether you find any bugs in it, and general feedback, as well as views on how we set up the privacy.
Thank you. So there are some interesting questions here. On the one hand, we are weaving our communities together, breaking down barriers, and wanting to be as accessible as possible. On the other hand, people have their own privacy questions, and there are varied settings that we can choose. So I just want to open the floor to comments to get a sense of where you are at. So I see David and Anne. Okay, over to you two first, thank you. And then Joe, thanks.
Very simple viewpoint. I personally would very much like to see a situation where every member of the forum needs to sign up, and by the time they have signed up, they should then exist in a space which is shared with every other member of the forum without restriction and without having to think about exactly where those boundaries are set. In other words,
Thank you, David. You're breaking up a little bit there, but I think I heard you say you'd like everything to be visible once you've signed up as a member. Thanks. Anne, over to you.
Okay, I just want to make a clarification about what's possible to do. Currently, the way the NING is set up means that any page that is public, that is set to public, and every single page is set individually. Any page that is set to public can be crawled by search engines. So there is a way to disable the crawling by search engines. So that would mean that's universal. We could disable searching by search engines for everyone's personal profile and for all discussions. Okay, so that would be a way of not having discussions turn up on Google or whatever. And I would imagine that would be something that everybody would be in favor of. So if we were to do that, then below that, one level down, the choices are, do we make discussions public? In other words, that people can see them whether or not they are registered onto the site or not. That is really like the fundamental question. And that's the one that David has just expressed his opinion about.
Thank you. Joe?
Feel in favour of being able to make discussions public, but messages between participants, I would prefer to be private.
Thank you. So you're a bit quiet, but I heard that you would like the discussions to be visible to anybody, but messages between members would be private. Thank you. JP?
Yes, and I'm very much in the, of course, breaking down barriers and having everybody open to everything. But my preference would be that everybody should be a part of the forum, and then they can see and certainly the discussions between the groups. I'm basically agreeing with David here. I don't see why we couldn't have a public discussion, a separate public discussion forum if people wanted a public discussion. But I think the minimum should be that people are involved in the forum, and that encourages people to be part of the forum. If you want to be, if you want to be involved in discussions, then it's as easy as joining up, and that could be a way of encouraging people to sign up as well. That would be my preference. There's no, and I did put it in the chat, there's no guarantee of the for search engines to not, any search engine could look at anything that's public and read it. It's a request to search engines not to list it, but anybody can see it, including bots as well. So if it's public, I mean.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Are we just talking about like reading access, or is this
reading access? Yeah.
Okay. So you definitely have to sign up to post.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. If you want to join in the discussions, you absolutely need to be a member. Okay, well, I'll insert myself into the speaking order, not as a facilitator then. And I would advocate for them being visible, mostly because there are going to be communities all around the world who are trying to deal with these issues, and to make our discussions visible will maybe act as a resource for those communities and those regions, give an idea of the kind of scope of the discussions that the forum is having, so that interested organisations who might wish to be part of the forum but don't want to commit themselves by joining up and commit themselves to the emails that may come with it, still want to get a good understanding of what the forum's about. That it seems to me to have to sign up before you can see what's being talked about would be a barrier to people engaging with the forum who are not committed already to joining it. Okay, now I'm back to facilitator mode. Any other comments before we close this conversation? Okay, so we've heard 2 people in each direction. That doesn't help you very much at all, does it, Anne and co? David?
Just a quick thought in passing. If we were to start while we were becoming familiar with the environment on the basis of being closed to anyone who was the sign up, then after we'd been running for a month or so, or 6 weeks or 2 months, we were happy as public, we could afterwards. Question.
Okay, David, you're breaking up there, but what I think I heard was that we could have it private for the beginning period while we're getting used to this whole thing, and then reconsider opening it up. And maybe we've lost you now, but is that what you were saying?
Sorry, I think that was a tech glitch at my end. Can you hear me at the moment?
Yeah, I can. Were you saying that we could start private for a period of time and then open it up later?
It seemed to me that that was actually a sensible starting point. It's partly the question of, is that desirable? It's partly a question of, is it possible?
Thank you. Okay, so does anybody have any concerns with David's proposal? Just to get a sense of the room? Okay, well, let's go with that then. If you're happy with that strategic comms group, then thank you very much for bringing that question to us. Okay, so we are over time a little bit, as you know, so I'm going to skip quickly through the last little bits. James, quick question to you. Is it important that the switch is talked about at this meeting, or can it wait till next month? Or have we lost you, James? Well, perhaps that answers that question then. Lovely. So our next meeting is a Saturday morning in the middle of September, and we'll be looking at 2 more strategic draft chapters from the Peace, Conflict and Reconciliation group and the Social Justice group. After that, in October, the middle of October, we'll hopefully, fingers crossed with lockdowns, meet face to face again, and we'll have an enormous effort with the rest of the chapters in our draft strategy. 7 different groups, including energy, transport, local economy, land use, food, forestry and natural fibre, and urban development. And I think I've missed somebody. Who did I miss? No, maybe that's all. So we've got, oh, and resources and waste. That's the other group. Thanks, Karen. And so all of those will be up for debate, and then we will have seen the draft strategy in its entirety. Now, you may have seen in the in a recent email that there is a working group that has started up to consider the strategic action plan from a holistic perspective, looking at the 3 goals and how well we're doing with each of those, looking at the values and the vision that we've been talking about and how well that we're working towards that. So if you're interested in taking a big picture approach to our strategic action plan, then do give Joanna an email. Perhaps she could put her email in the chat for you. And that work will be getting underway more and more between now and when we reach consensus on that draft strategy in February. Huge thank you to all of you who have been here today. It's a beautiful day, and I am ready to go out and have a walk instead of sitting in front of my screen, and I bet you are too. I really appreciate your time this morning, and all of the effort that you continue to put into the forum. It's just astonishing that this huge amount of work is happening on a volunteer basis, and it couldn't happen without you. So thank you. Thank you in particular to everybody who presented today, to Greg for helping out behind the scenes, and to everybody who is going to send in any notes that didn't end up in any of those shared documents to add to the minutes. Thanks to Jessie for taking our minutes as well, and to the world in general for being wonderful. I'm feeling happy today. Okay, karakia to close. Kia tau ki a tātou katoa, a te atawhai o tō tātou ariki, a ihu karaiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga, ke te wairua tapu, ake, 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 amene.
Amene. Thanks, Julie.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, everybody. Great to see you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. See you again.